You're listening to Why We Do What We Do. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your introverted host, Abraham.
And I am your BuzzFeed host, Shane.
Ooh, that was even better. Oh, man. Yours is so good. We are a psychology podcast. We're going to cover all kinds of psychology things. We come out every week. We're edutainment. I think we decided last time we spoke.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what we do.
Yes.
Hey, if you like this, you should support us over on Patreon. Leave us a rating and review. Check out our merch store on our website where you can get all kinds of cool swag. I'll talk more about that at the end of this episode. But important thing to address, as we just covered in our idioms episode recently, Elephant in the Room, It's Star Wars Day.
It is.
Welcome.
May the 4th be with you.
Exactly.
And then tomorrow is Revenge of the 5th.
There you go. Perfect. So if you have not already begun your Star Wars marathon, start it today.
Yes, 100%.
Go back and rewatch those movies, watch them in the TV shows, feel the love.
Yeah. And you know what? I'm just going to put this out there, and this is going to be controversial. All the movies are good.
Wow. That was a bold statement. Where do you stand on the Christmas special?
Oh, I haven't watched the Christmas special, so I don't know about that one. I don't consider that a movie. I think that's like an alternate universe. But apparently Mark Hamill thinks it's fine.
Okay, that's fair. I've heard a lot of interesting things, but I think it's become sort of a beloved gem of weirdness among Star Wars fans.
Yes.
And I believe it was recently added to Disney Plus, although I could be wrong. So I might try and check that one out.
I try to consume as much Star Wars as I can.
Right.
But there is some stuff I've missed.
As one should.
Yeah, I haven't seen like some of the cartoon stuff. I've tried to catch up on that, and I hear it's really great.
Yeah.
But as far as like the main trilogies, and I would say even Solo, which is my least favorite of all of the movies, but it's still good.
Fair.
It's still an entertaining romp. So go enjoy those.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything you just said.
That's why we're here.
And obviously, we're not talking about Star Wars in today's episode. You
Nope.
wouldn't know that from how we began. We are talking about online personality tests or quizzes and what they are, why they're popular, whether they say something meaningful about you and your personality, which you may already think you have an answer to, and you're probably right.
I'm excited about this one because I have been seeing a lot of personality tests come out.
Same.
And you're just kind of like, I've seen too many times where people are like, my IQ is this. And it's like, but did you get tested? Because I feel like this is kind of this like really I don't know. I feel like it's an interesting thing. So I'm glad that we're talking about this and dispelling some of the myths around this.
Now, if you want to go back and listen, we've done a couple of episodes related to this topic. We did an episode on personality and what that is, how it's measured, that sort of thing. The big five is often a thing you'll hear about when talking about this. We also did one on the self, which I think is related in a way. We also did one on the projection tests, like the Rorschach test.
Yeah.
That's sort of a related idea, this revealing sort of who you are sort of thing. So let's unpack. Shane, tell us what a personality is, just as a quick refresher before we get into our topic.
Absolutely. So the APA defines personality as individual differences in characteristic patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving. I think that's a fair, general, very broad definition. But the Encyclopedia Britannica says that personality embraces moods, attitudes, and opinions, and is most clearly expressed in interactions with other people. It includes behavioral characteristics, both inherent and acquired, that distinguish one person from another, and that can be observed in people's relations to the environment and to the social group.
Yeah, so in general, people use the term personality to describe what a person's like and how they are likely to behave. That's an important part of it. So basically, it's what you do, just the things that you do, grouped into some sort of categories for the things that you do. And this is done for reasons.
Yeah. Something.
Yeah.
Humans like categories. I mean, that's really what it is. Like, they like simple answers, right? So it makes sense that we have personality categories, but we'll get into some of this other stuff too. Now, when we ask what personality is, like when we really try to understand what it is, we ask the questions of like, can we detect it? Can we measure it? And so far, most explanations of personality fall into very mentalistic or non-physical universes, right? You can't directly observe personality. You can measure traits or patterns of behavior. Or you can measure verbal behavior or responses that people might make towards their opinions or attitudes and whatnot. You can measure those things, but measuring personality itself is nigh impossible because it doesn't really exist in the way that we think it does.
Yeah, well, and it's basically reifying the term personality to treat it as if it's something to be measured. Because as you were sort of saying, when people are measuring the things that you say, the things that you do, the patterns and routines that you have, and they're calling that personality, they are measuring something, right? And they're measuring something visual and real and tangible. And those are the things that you do. Now, what they're then doing is superimposing that onto a description of why you do it, which is the category in which those patterns fall. So like, you tend to wash your hands a lot. You tend to organize things a lot. You have a neurotic personality type, right? That might be how they go about doing it. But all they're saying is, we see you doing these things. That's really the only statement that's being made.
Yeah.
But we're going to categorize those things as personality.
Yeah.
And now that's who you are. And there is no cause there, but they treat it like it's one, right? And so for centuries, people have tended to look for causes of behavior that are not, I think, in the sort of observable universe. Instead, they look at what we do as a reflection of this broader, hidden multiverse of madness.
That was very good. That was very smooth.
Thank you. The alternate reality where the actual control happens, and that affects then what we do in the observable reality. And it's not to say that people are actually thinking of it in terms of there being multiple realities, but if you think about it logically, you can't just attribute the cause of why what we do to a personality, which is just what we do. Right. I got embarrassed because I'm shy. You know that I'm shy because I got embarrassed. He shouted at his employees because he's impatient. How do you know he's impatient? Because he shouted at his employees. It goes back to circular reasoning. It's saying that we can label something. That label then becomes the cause, and then we study the label.
It's a snake eating its own tail, right? So that's kind of what happens.
Nice.
So there's scientific explanations of personality, and we're going to go over a couple of them. And it's worth looking at these theoretical explanations for what personality is, how it works, and whatnot. So first, we've got Psychoanalytic Theory, which applies id, ego, and superego into the idea that like all of these constructs are in constant conflict with one another, or they support or they kind of influence one another in a way, and it shapes a lot of our behaviors, our thoughts, and kind of our emotions in regard to the world around us.
Yeah, they're basically all the things that we do are caused, just as you said, by this conflict between these hidden mental experiences, most of which we're unaware of.
Yeah.
The humanistic theory, this comes from Maslow. We talked about his hierarchy of needs on a previous episode. And then Carl Rogers, who we also talked about Rogers in the motivational interviewing episode. So that's another theory, is this humanistic theory.
We've also got trait theory, which talks about collections of characteristics called traits that compose the makeup of an individual. And so you'll hear the terms cardinal, central, and secondary traits describing somebody's personality in that regard.
And then we've got the social cognitive theory. This is, the explanation of that is kind of in the name. This is the idea of there's the behavior and environment as well as the cognitive mechanisms. So our personality is essentially what we do and how we think about the things that we do. And all of these theories require the existence of some sort of, again, immeasurable, something that we can't detect, some sort of thing where mental events are pulling the strings of our behavior, as a way to sort of think of it. There are these non-observable variables that are inferred to exist by the fact that behavior existed at all.
Right, absolutely. So that leads us to, personality does get assessed. Whenever we go to psychologists or whenever we go to professionals, we can actually get personality assessments. Those tools do exist, but what we're talking about today are online personality tests. So I think it'd be fun. I've got one pulled up from BuzzFeed. I don't know if you pulled it up, Abraham, but I pulled it up on my end, and I'm going to do it real quick, and I'm going to kind of share the questions with everybody as we go.
Yeah, I pulled up mine as well, so I'll do mine right after you do yours.
Okay, good. Well, we can do it together. That's perfect.
Oh, yeah, okay. We'll do it at the same time.
Yeah, so this is, what does your first name say about your personality? This is a BuzzFeed quiz, so we know the science behind this. And the first question is, how many letters do you have in your name? And it gives 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, 7 to 8, 9 to 10, or 11 plus. So I'm going to go with 5 because my name is Shane.
I'm going to go with 7 for Abraham.
And then the next question is, what is the first letter in your name? So we're going to go ahead and answer that correctly. I believe mine is S.
I believe mine is A.
All right.
Learning a lot. This is like learning on Sesame Street or something.
Yeah. Then what is the last letter in your name? Mine's going to be an E.
M.
Is your name followed by anything? Junior, senior, 1, 2, 3, or none? And I'm going to go with none because it's not.
PhD isn't an option. So
right. I was going to say.
It's not none.
Also, I'm going to just change my name to the singular Shane and just drop the rest of my name because that's I've got my Prince complex going on. On a scale of 1 to 10, how common would you say your name is? And this is a 1 to 2, which is not very common, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, 7 to 8, 9, or 10, incredibly common. I don't think that's a fair question. I would say mine's middle ground. There's some Shanes out there. I mean, there was a character on the L Word named Shane.
Okay. I know Abraham is not a common name, but it's not common in the United States. I believe it's much more common elsewhere than in other cultures. So I think I'm going to do the lower end of sort of middle range.
Yeah. That's a tough question.
I don't have a good inventory of how popular the name Abraham is.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think of like, I've not been to Ireland, so I can't imagine how many Shanes are out there. So I imagine it's several. I think
it's everyone.
I think, yeah, everybody's named Shane. It's like it's the Mr. and Mrs. of Ireland. And then finally, how many syllables are in your name? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or more. So I'm going to go with 1.
I feel like that's linked to how many letters there are. But hey, it has a cool little effect where it drops confetti.
That was fun.
I'm going to read mine. This is absurd.
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So just to remind everyone, the name of this quiz is, what does your first name say about your personality?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So my name is Abraham. Apparently that's enough. Uh-huh. That's enough right there. And it says that I'm sensitive and trusting. You're sensitive by nature. You can't help it. You're an emotional person whose feelings cannot be contained. This can sometimes cause you to overthink, but you tend to catch yourself before it gets too out of control. You tend to see the best in people always, which is why you are so trusting. Although people have taken advantage of this, you've learned to see the warning signs. Wow, I'm having hardcore flashbacks of our astrology episode right now.
Yes. Yeah, I kind of got the same thing too. So like not the same result, but like the same feeling for sure. Well, and I think this is funny because like it doesn't actually say like what this should do is it should be, what is your first name? Type that in and it should give you the results, not these kind of other indicators, right?
Yeah. Like it's basically asking me to evaluate information I don't have when just putting in my name would essentially yield a more accurate information. You should read yours.
Okay, so mine it says passionate and personable. You're the kind of person that brings a smile to people's faces. You have a gigantic heart and wear it proudly on your sleeve. Whether you're feeling good, bad, or in between, it's easy for people to see. It's sometimes hard for you to think logically because your feelings get in the way, but you're working on it.
Does that feel accurate?
I mean, sure, but I feel like if I were to get this in, it said, you are human. Sometimes you think and sometimes you feed yourself. And then sometimes you sleep at night and sometimes you laugh and sometimes you cry. I would get the same kind of feeling and result. So, okay, I don't know exactly how exact it is. I feel like I'm a passionate person. I can't make the argument for like whether or not I put a smile on people's faces, but I do think that there is like that kind of idea of like, there are those traits in there that are also desirable traits. So I want to be that person. So it's easier for me to kind of lean into that.
I really like the sometimes you feed yourself. That's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. It's not 100% of the time.
You have used the bathroom before.
Several times even.
I know this because your first name is Shane.
If that gives you any indicator of kind of how these, sometimes these online personality tests go. I mean, obviously this was a BuzzFeed one and they tend to be a little bit more like fun and lighthearted, but there are other ones out there that are masked a little bit differently, is more serious. So if you have ever in your life been on the internet before AOL and Netscape Navigator, those do exist. If you've ever been on there though, you've probably seen an online personality test and you've probably taken one. You've probably taken several. For those of you who go by your 4 letters, your ENTJ and all that stuff, you have taken a personality test, and we'll talk about some of that a little bit.
And actually, we'll talk about that after we hear some people selling you an online personality test. All right. Hopefully you had fun in your personality test, and we're back. So let's talk about how well can we trust the designers of this personality test? Because it's really worth asking, somebody made this, right? Like this didn't just spring out of the wellspring of internet ether. Like somebody had to sit down and write these things and program them and set them all up. So who created these?
Yeah. And these are generally created by members of the non-scientific community, right? I can't imagine there's a scientific consultant at BuzzFeed that's helping develop these. And
nope.
BuzzFeed's an easy one. It's an easy target, low-hanging fruit. We know that. But what they do is they usually try to rope in the user by offering an explanation of what they are, what their future might hold, what kind of person they should marry, other similar claims. Like, what are you getting out of it, right? I want to know who I am based on, how many episodes of The Office I've watched or something like that.
Yeah.
And those are the sillier ones. But this is usually accomplished through some kind of pretty obscure sounding method. So, for example, answer these 10 questions about cats to understand what your career will be. Or are you optimistic or pessimistic based on these random questions? So these are different things that we've seen. And we just demonstrated. What does your first name tell you about your personality? Which is
right.
A whole lot. So
yeah,
this is kind of the trend with this.
Exactly. Now, and actually, I don't know about you. I'm wondering if this is just me because I know how targeted ads and everything can be online, but I've been getting these suggested websites for some reason. So like I look at a bunch of different news aggregators that are sort of like these are headlines and blogs and news things that are coming up. And for some reason, I keep getting these websites that they have some ambiguous image on them. Often it's an optical illusion of some sort. Mm-hmm. And the headline reads something like, what you immediately see in this picture reveals whether you have a masculine or feminine brain.
Huh.
Or what you first notice in this picture can determine if you are depressed. And so things like that. Have you been seeing anything like that showing up in your feed?
Yeah. Oh yeah. All the time.
Okay.
And it's always really funny because I'm like, what is it? Like, and it's ultimately like very easy to go like, oh, I'm curious, right? Like it piques interest immediately.
Yeah, it does. And it's like, it sucks because it's like, I know it's nonsense. I know it is, right? I look at it and I'm like, but I'm morbidly curious enough to be like, but what are you saying though?
Yeah.
Like, I know you're wrong. And then I do the stupid thing and I click and then they get the ad money and it's like, I don't know. And then it just keeps showing up in my news aggregator. So that's probably why. But
yeah.
Anyway, that's a very similar sort of idea here.
Clearly, these tests, though, they should be a source of entertainment rather than being considered useful information. They should be embraced with a healthy amount of skepticism because, as we just showed you, like there is no link between the test itself and the question that's being answered ultimately. But some, especially more officially sounding assessments, have the power to influence test taker decisions if they're not observed with philosophic doubt or like the idea of kind of our healthy skepticism, or put through Carl Sagan's wonderful bullshit detector, we'll call it. In recent news, for example, you'll see pop sensation Adele announcing that she divorced her partner after taking a magazine personality quiz, which is pretty intense. That's a pretty intense life decision based on something that you'll find in like, I don't know, GQ or People magazine.
So Kyle helped put together these notes. So thank you, Kyle. You did an awesome job. But when I first read this, I was like, what? Could that possibly be real? And so I had to check like 4 different sources to like get some more information and confirm that specific fact in here. And like, yeah, it's legitimately real. And she was open about this. She talked about it on several news sites or news interviews that she did, where what she said basically was that the question asked something like, what's something about you that nobody else knows? And basically her answer, which I'm not saying correctly, but it was like, I'm like really unhappy and I feel like I'm not really living the life that I value. And so I think that in itself almost makes it feel like personality tests are a good thing.
Right.
If they're helping people feel like they're getting more connected to their values. Mm-hmm. And I think if that was the case, I would be inclined to also think so. What I think can also happen, and I'm not saying this is what happened with Adele, but I think that what can happen is that they can set you up for questions with answers like that sort of spiral you out when you like were perfectly fine beforehand.
Yeah.
And they're just like, do you ever think about how meaningless life is? And then you're just like, oh no,
like, yeah, all the time.
Yeah. And then it's just like, you find yourself just doing drugs and like moping around all over the place because everything is meaningless. And I don't know.
It's those questions that, like you said, they will spiral you out. They'll lead you. It's like, did you ever think about how your toes are probably touching each other right now? And like, you didn't think that until I said that. And you're like, that sucks so much.
Oh no. My toes are touching each other.
Oh no. It's like, did you ever consider that you should probably swallow the spit in your mouth right now? And you're like, I hate this. Don't you need to clear your throat? And you're like, I can't, this is enough. I'm done.
That's right.
So I think it's worth like getting into the idea that these are personality assessments that are not really personality assessments designed to be, they're designed to be entertainment, right? And there are personality assessments that are used for a variety of important decision-making functions. There are people that use these all the time. Employers use them to see if an applicant will be a good fit for their company or a specific position. Career counselors will use them to help guide students towards a specific job or maybe a career path. Some online personality tests are versions of more commonly accepted personality tests like the Myers-Briggs, the DISC, the Enneagram. Is that how you pronounce that?
I haven't heard of that one, actually.
I learned that I believe I'm a 2 or a 5. I can't remember which one it is. I'm one or the other. But anyway.
So you've done the Enneagram?
I had somebody do that for me, and I was like, I don't want to do that. Because I was like, I don't believe it. But some people just use them for personal interpretations of themselves or to understand their partners better. And that's a lot of times what you'll see those online tests are used for.
Yeah, that's the whole love languages one, I think.
Yeah, 100%.
Or maybe to like justify why you're angry at your partner. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Don't you just hate when they do this? Yes, always. I always have. Yeah,
they're like, you're right. You should be angry. You should divorce them and come and look up this phone number who just happens to be the author of this quiz. This poor single person is looking for love. Anyway, and actually, when you said the whole thing with companies, we actually we kind of came down on that in the personality episode because there was some evidence to suggest that, like, first of all, people are not going to be very authentic when they're trying to take a personality test when it's about their employment, right? So I think it sets people up to both be scared about that situation and potentially rule out people who would be a good fit and rule in people who wouldn't be a good fit based on spurious information. Mm-hmm. And I think there's actually some places, maybe even some states, that have banned or severely restricted companies' ability to hire based on personality tests. And they definitely did with polygraphs, but I can't remember if they did with personality tests or not now that it's been so long removed. We'll have to revisit that episode.
Yeah.
But anyway, I've dropped a couple of vocabulary terms in here. Let's do spurious as a recent one.
Yeah, it's so good. That's a good word.
So basically spurious just means, the short synonym for spurious is fake. Uh-huh. It basically is a line of reasoning that is not actually valid. It also means not what it claims to be. And it seems like it is based on inadequate information that is probably wrong or just illegitimate, is like another way of thinking of it. So that's spurious.
You should use that more often, folks.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's actually, there was a really good Simpsons joke. I forget the setup of it, but Homer makes some claim about something. He like logics his way to some answer, and he's asking Lisa about it. He asks her what she thinks, and she said, "It sounds spurious." And he says, "Thank you." Clearly not knowing what that word means.
So good. So good.
Great. The writing on that show is so good.
It's brilliant.
So obviously there are a lot of assessments that do have scientific backing and support. And this is an important feature of this, is we're not saying that personality tests, I guess I'm kind of saying this, but we're not saying that like none of these have any scientific basis whatsoever, right? But the ones that are the well-researched, validated assessments that are used, those are generally not made freely available to untrained laypersons to self-administer and then interpret their own data, right?
Right.
That's not generally how these highly sensitive tests are constructed. The unique thing about these quizzes, these online personality quizzes as they're developed, and what we're discussing is that, just to make sure we're really clear on the distinction here, these are the informal, self-administered, check-a-box type information gathering tools. And we'll talk more about the information gathering a little bit later. That's kind of all they are. And that's why they kind of stand apart from those more official assessments. Now, you can go see our personality episode for us to dig in a little bit on what I think you extract even from a validated personality test, which I think is going to be a thing.
Yes.
Take it or leave it. People use it for various things. Recently, there was a big update on some of the research on personalities. I think it was maybe a couple of years ago, particularly on the Big Five.
Yeah,
that we should revisit at some point. It's kind of its own big thing, but it's worth understanding that when we're talking about these personality quizzes, we're really referring to these sort of bizarre, self-administered, one-size-fits-all quizzes.
So at their best, personality tests in general might provide some useful information that provides insight into our relationships with the world or with others, and kind of our interactions, maybe some insight to ourselves. But online personality tests, they tend to be pretty entertaining. They might evoke some thoughts or conversations. They might even help guide some next steps. But at the end of the day, they're designed mostly to be entertaining. And the majority of personality assessments in general are designed to maybe give you some next steps if you're unclear or unsure. It might give the therapist that you're working with some kind of insight on the way you think about certain things. Like, for example, the MMPI is a huge assessment. I mean, we just did a personality test and it was 6 questions?
Right.
The MMPI is something close to 600 or 700 questions.
Yeah.
That are tested and normed and all this stuff, right?
Really designed to wear you down.
It works. At the end, you're like, oh my God, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
It is important, though, to understand what personality test results are telling us. And the results themselves of each test are compiled after our own responses to these questions. We are self-reporting. We are specifically answering questions along these, whether it's an informal or formal one, we are answering along these questions. So it's our answers that dictate and show kind of what those results are going to look like.
So you're a Hufflepuff. Now what?
What are you going to do now?
So in other words, what we say we would do in a situation is not necessarily what we would actually do in a situation. And I do think that that is one important caveat of really all self-report, not even just related to the personality tests, but
100%.
All hypotheticals, all self-report. We're not really that good at reflecting on how we would show up in a situation unless we've been in that situation before. Then we're a little bit better at it because we can reflect on how we have shown up in that situation. Now, our own self-appraisals are often also pretty poor, and we might think, hey, we handled that great. And everyone on the outside is like,
nope.
No, you didn't. Please fix that and don't ever do it again. Yeah. Almost jinxed there.
Yeah. So close. I'm so close to getting a Coke.
So furthermore, and as we already mentioned, the online personality tests are often user made, or they're written by like a journalist or something. They don't have any research backing. There's no empirical evidence to support them. They're really, all they do is they're meant to get people's attention. They want clicks. They want viewership. And ultimately, this will generate revenue. They're not actually intended to provide any legitimate insight. It is just, this is a thing that will attract users. And we'll actually get to that a little bit later as well.
For sure. I mean, they often give results that could apply to anyone, like we just demonstrated with that the name one that we just did, right?
Yeah.
Like we mentioned, it's kind of like horoscopic or psychic readings. And when people read these results, the illusion of accuracy is given. For example, anxiety has been an issue in your life, which is every human being has some level of anxiety. That is, we are designed to respond to the environment in certain ways. And anxiety is one of those things that helps us kind of
being a person.
Activate our systems, right?
Yeah.
Anxiety is part of the fabric of human experience.
Yeah.
You know, it can apply to an enormous amount of people, and probably 100% of the people who answered yes to the quiz question that asked, have you been experiencing anxiety lately? Could be literally anyone.
Yeah.
And for those people who are self-reporting and saying, no, I haven't, they're probably lying to you. They probably have.
Like, I don't even know what that is. Who are you?
Yeah. Yeah. What kind of question is this?
Now, even the more official assessments that have research behind them often have a sort of replication problem. As we said, and we've dug into this before, it's common in psychological literature. We've seen a lot of people with MRIs having trouble replicating. There was a big study a few years back showing that some enormous proportion of psychological studies couldn't be replicated. And I know at least one of the journals that sort of flagship journals that we read, the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, they've recently added, in the last few years, a section that's just replications to specifically try and get after this problem of replications.
Yeah.
Which I love. I think that was a really good move on their part.
100%.
Yeah. So I'm happy that's in there now. And I think that more journals need that. I think we need dedicated replication space because, as you'll hear on many other sort of science news podcasts, what they'll talk about as a problem in science is the push for new research all the time. Is that like, if this isn't something new, then it won't get published because it's just a replication. And that's, I mean, honestly, that's not always true. But the problem is it does become, thinking about like tenure, for example, they really want you to be publishing new things, making big contributions. You're more likely to get cited if you're doing some new things. So there's like lots of reasons that the system incentivizes novel research. But there were people who were doing replications and then we weren't necessarily hearing about them, or they were trying to do replications and we weren't hearing about their failures. And so I think it's really important that we have dedicated replication space in our scientific journals.
Agreed. 100%. Now, a lot of personality assessments, these tools, even the ones that are standardized, are, we mentioned earlier, indirect measures. So when you respond on a scale of 1 to 10, your 10 might be somebody else's 6. When you answer often versus very often versus sometimes, that's particular to your context. And it's difficult to replicate across multiple people because, again, it's one, measuring your context, but two, your scales might be not necessarily standardized to somebody else's scales. So this produces a lot of really challenging data to kind of sift through and organize through because everybody's report is going to be different. And consistently, you might report differently on the same question, which, you know, there are some tests like the MMPI does this thing where it does kind of test for consistency in answers.
Right. That's a big part of it, is repeating the question in different ways. So you're sort of ensuring that you're paying attention and answering consistently.
Yes, but that is for statistically validated and normed tests, not online personality tests.
But I will say when I took the MMPI, I was specifically attuned to the fact that when I would see a question I knew I'd seen before, I was thinking, oh, they're trying to trick me. Like, I need to read this really carefully because maybe I should be giving a different answer now that I'm like seeing this worded slightly differently. Like before it seemed to mean all the time. And this one seems to mean most of the time. And those are maybe different things. So I need to be careful in how I like, maybe one of them was a no, not all the time, but this one's yes, it's most of the time type thing. And so like, I think they can't control how people are going to interpret their questions.
Right.
Online personality quizzes don't care.
Right. They don't care at all.
Legitimately do not. They could not possibly care less how you interpret their questions. But in those more validated ones, they were trying to address the issue of people answering inconsistently across, as you said, repeatedly taking the test. And so there's sort of built-in validation by having the repeat happen within the same assessment. But anyway, I think it is time to reveal the next masked singer. And so we're going to find out who that is right after the break.
Hopefully I don't walk off.
Yeah. It was Rudy Giuliani. And so
and so that's the end of the show. Goodbye.
The end of the show. Goodbye. Everyone's sad now because some producer made a terrible, terrible, terrible choice.
100%.
Okay, so let's get back to talking about personality tests. And in particular, let's look at some of the factors here, because responses to any set of questions that you might receive, how you answer is going to be influenced by environmental factors, your current circumstances. It also is going to be influenced by sort of the history you bring to this test and your familiarity with the subject matter, your familiarity with those types of questions. And then again, how you're going to interpret those questions, and also what you might think that the quiz designer wants to hear, what they're trying to get at. We might be thinking of like, how is this going to look for you? And then also, of course, part of this is the creator of that quiz, the test, their bias that they brought in designing it. So all of those are factors that are going to participate in influencing what kind of answer you give in any given moment. And that's why there's so much variability in there.
Absolutely. So, for example, if a quiz asked you how you would respond to somebody cutting you off in traffic, you would provide some answer based on what you think you might do, right? How you would likely behave on the road, how you hope others see you, familiarity with driving situations. They can all make the response to your question vary widely from what you would actually do or what would actually be observed or measured in any given real life situation. Like, we might respond because we want to sound like we sound better than we are.
Yeah.
In the actual assessment world, that's called faking good. So we're going to fake good, or we're just going to be bad reporters. The creator of the assessment's also going to have a bias. It's going to lead you to certain questions as well, or certain answers. So even if you are faking good or faking bad, there is this kind of piece where people are going to kind of steer your directions or steer your questions in a little, steer your responses specifically.
I think about this when I hear people yelling at the TV screen when they're like watching a movie or a TV show and they're like, oh, what are you doing? That's so stupid. And I think about it. I'm like, honestly, were I in that position, I feel like I'd probably be doing the same thing because first of all, I don't have all the information that the viewer has.
Of course.
And second of all, when you're in like that emotionally charged of a situation, you're kind of just going to do whatever is the immediate like resolution to that problem as much as possible. So like, if you're that desperate, then it's like, yes, my morals tell me I would not cheat in this way. But like, if I was in this person's situation, given what they know, what their experiences are, and they're like, I can probably get away with this. I don't think anyone's watching me. This is going to solve all of my problems. It sucks, but like, ultimately nobody's going to get hurt and I'm going to help save some people. I'm going to do it. And like, I could see that sort of logic playing out, but like when you're watching and you have all the information, like, no, someone is going to see you. We know this is going to like, this is a movie. So we know you're going to get caught, all those sorts of things. Then like, it seems really stupid, but anyway, just saying we are so bad at knowing exactly what we're going to do in a situation or what we think we might do in those hypotheticals. And it's, only when we're actually in those situations that we see how we sort of show up. And even, like I said, I think we're probably better at it when we've had that experience.
Of course.
We're like, I have been cut off in traffic and I know how I respond or how I have responded in the past. And so that gives us a better predictor, but I think it's still not perfect, right?
Absolutely.
The whole saying I've heard of people, they're like, and I mentioned this on the show before, but we probably have the same several hundred listeners that have been with us the whole time. So maybe they'll remember But the saying the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior, I dislike that tremendously, because I'm always think that like the best predictor is what did you learn from that situation?
Right.
Because if you just keep doing the same thing in a situation without having learned anything, I'm really concerned that you're not actually a human. I think you might be a robot.
Yeah. Big concerns.
Yeah. Whatever you did in the last situation taught you something about how to respond in the situation. And so whatever you learned is the better predictor of what you're going to do next time than what you did that time. So anyway, I always just really dislike that saying.
I get why. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So when we make some kind of inference or we make decisions based on how the world works or about how the world works based on indirective measures alone, it becomes problematic, right? At the end of the day, when we are going, oh, you answered this question and this is what we would make the decision off of without looking at any of the variables that are happening in the real world, that produces some really specific concerns. It's incomplete information in an assessment. And we have to be able to make sure that whatever assessment tools we're using are complete and that we have all the factors that are influencing or guiding decisions that people are making.
Now, can we use an example introvert extrovert test?
Of course we can.
Okay. So what are introverts and extroverts? How would we even measure this thing, right?
Right. Yeah. And I don't know that anybody's done this really well, but many people spout the results of how introverted or extroverted they are with these types of tests, right? So we'll go get tested on this as a way of showing why they are the way they are to others. And often for entertainment value, we'll see that, but employers or counselors have used these tests to inform decision making. And what they'll try to do is they'll try to figure out an introvert or somebody who is not outgoing, they're quiet, they're shy. Maybe those are some characteristics you might see. And an extrovert is somebody who's very outgoing, they're very personable, they're a go-getter, and you'll see these different kind of like, especially in a corporate world, you'll see these words, these buzzwords that are attached to these personality traits.
Yeah. This is actually sort of kind of what got me interested in psychology in the first place, is this magical thing of like, oh, I can discover who I am. And that's going to tell me why I do these things and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And at first, when I did that, I came back as leaning introverted. What about you? Where are you on that?
I think I lean extroverted.
Okay. Is that what you showed up on the tests?
No, I think that's just kind of based on my, if I were to evaluate my social interactions, I think maybe I would appear extroverted to people, but I feel very introverted, where it's like, if you use that kind of metaphor, my social battery gets drained very rapidly. Mm-hmm. And so whenever I go to a conference, I was just at a conference and yesterday I just shut my phone off and did not talk to anybody because I was exhausted. I was like, you just have this kind of experience of extroverted, I'm out. And I'm like, nope, I'm done. I got to be quiet now.
Well, that's exactly what I think is the problem with this whole thing, is that I think there's no such thing as introverted and extroverted. I think what you have is you have I'll use myself as an example and your situation as well, is I really don't like being in large groups of people, particularly if I don't know most of the people in that group.
Right.
But that's common for a lot of people. Most people probably don't like being in really large groups, particularly if they don't know the people in those groups.
Right.
But let's say you have a huge family gathering and you're really close to your family and you've got 30 people around you. You might really enjoy that situation if you feel really close to the people that are there. And the other thing too is, let's say you've been in lockdown for 2 years and you haven't been going to in-person events and you go to this group thing and at first it's a blast. You get to spend time with people, but it is exhausting to continuously be engaging that to that level. And so over time, as you said, our batteries sort of drain and we don't want to talk to other people. And maybe we're not having a good day, we don't want to talk to other people. And so mine has come back, the test has come back as introverted. When I answer questions no, I'd rather hang out with 2 or 3 really close friends than go to a big party. But the thing is I really do like being around people. I feel like I'm actually really social. I love my friends. I make a really big point to stay in contact with people that I am or have been close with, and text and call and try and find out how things are going in their lives and that sort of thing. And I sort of found that I really, really value my social relationships. And the other thing is, I think even the most extroverted people will say this, it can be really awkward to meet new people. You have no idea what you're going to get.
Yeah.
And so I think that going into these big social situations can feel a little bit uncomfortable because you don't know what you're going to be walking into, and it might be really uncomfortable. And that's that's being a human. So again, I don't think that this designation tells us anything meaningful like how you tend to show up. Now, there are people who like love social anything. They're like, the more people, the better. I don't care if I know them, whatever, just like get me out there. And like, obviously there's going to be a spectrum of people who are like much, much, much more uncomfortable.
For sure.
But there's so much variability and shift in that. And like, what does that actually tell us or mean? I think is very, very little. And I think how you got there is also not that your introversion caused you to feel that way or your extroversion caused you to want to behave that way.
Right.
It's just got shaped up over time. And so that you sort of developed a pattern.
Well, and I think that's exactly it, right? So like if I ask that question of like, do you like big groups? And you answer no, you can't figure out what percentage of introvert or extrovert you are. That doesn't make any sense. So I agree with you on that, where it's like, you know, in my experience, like I don't mind being in a big group of people where I don't know everybody. But it depends on what I'm doing in that group.
Right.
If I'm just walking around and kind of keeping to myself within the group, then I'm okay. Usually I can stand to be in a large group for a long period of time. If I'm at a concert, then I can be in a large group of people with a shared interest, and I can spend so much time in that and not feel like I am stressed or anxious or anything like that. But if I'm in a large group of people and I have to interact with a lot of people within that large group, whether I know them or I don't, I will interact with all those people, but then there's a point in time where I'm like, okay, I'm so exhausted from all of this interaction that I need like time to not hear any noise or anything like that. And you kind of go, well, that sounds like an introvert, but when he's in this group, he's literally talking to everybody, or he's like, you know, it's one of those things where there's no line. And I think that's part of the problem with personality tests in general, is they make it so that it's a very clear distinction of like, this is your personality. There's no deviation from this personality. This is what you will do, without the nuance of like these social interactions or the social context that influence your behavior in a different way.
And that's related to this idea of how this is used when you're thinking about employers, for example, who might say, well, we only want to hire extroverted people because we need sales and you need to be comfortable going out and talking to people who you don't know. But the thing is, like, you might have an extrovert who's also like a manipulative sociopath. And like, that's part of why they love that stuff, as they're like, oh, sweet, I can sucker this old lady out of her money. And like, that's how they approach it. And maybe the company's like really into that. They're like, yes, that guy is our top salesperson. We love them.
Right.
But they also might like be, you know, make customers feel really frightened and uncomfortable and not want to be in that situation. And so I think, again, it's not actually going to tell you anything about really in a meaningful way what to expect. I think what you really need is just, what's your job performance like? How trainable are you in this situation? What have you already learned from other jobs that I can capitalize on? That sort of thing.
Yeah. So I think when you do these assessments, if somebody ends up as more of an extrovert but lacks those skills, if someone is able to cheat that system by answering questions a certain way, what do we do? And that's why these companies, when they do these personality test assessments, it doesn't make any sense. Most of the time, they're not validated tools, and it's not going to tell you anything about that person's work history, that learning history, their ability to learn, their ability to develop skills, their ability to enter into a space where maybe they don't have any experience working at a certain location, right? Like, I think about if I were to take a test about my experience or like what I thought I would do working on behavior analysis before I ever entered it, there's no way that I would have gotten hired because I had no experience in that.
Right.
I was like a case manager. I was like, I know where paperwork goes. That's cool. And I can make a hell of a latte for my Starbucks experience. Like, that's really, I feel like I'm a pretty good behavior analyst. So if I would have taken one of these tests and it didn't yield the results at the agency, I likely never would have been hired and never would have started a career or been accepted into college programs because of this. So, I mean, there's a lot of poor uses for this that just yield such goofy results that it's a shame that these are still used in a way that prevent somebody from an opportunity or give people opportunities that shouldn't really get them.
I think you're a great behavior analyst.
Thanks. I think you're a great behavior analyst.
Thanks. And then, of course, you have the issue, and we sort of alluded to this, but people sort of trying to cheat the quiz by giving the answers they think the company wants to hear. And I think that would be extremely easy to do. So if you're looking for some kind of test that's going to uncover the hidden truth about you or other people, you're just not going to find it. Not really, anyway. You're going to find weird gimmicks that claim to be that. And the assessments that claim to do this should be really viewed with a great deal of skepticism. And I think also we'd alluded to this earlier, so we need to get into this. What can we learn about IQ from these online quizzes? While we mull that over, let's take a break for some sponsors to do their thing. Okay, let's really quickly get into the IQ test because we have the story to unfold for you after this. So let's go through this real fast.
Yeah. So the IQ test is one of the first assessments that covered innate, non-physical traits in humans, and it has a similar story. So Alfred Binet designed the IQ test in 1905 to assess and help underperforming children. And so the assumption was that an underlying ability existed in each person to solve problems called general intelligence.
General intelligence? That
was good. I like that.
Thank you. That's a How I Met Your Mother reference. Yeah, and actually, we did like a 3-part series on the IQ test and the history of the IQ test and intelligence testing and that sort of thing. So, and I would recommend that. We get a lot of feedback from that one. So, but yes, the idea here is that kids would take the test, they'd get some kind of score. The score would be compared against other kids of the same age, and it would indicate essentially how much assistance that child would need. Originally, it was really just intended to be a placement program for sort of special ed services for kids who needed it. Now, while well-intentioned, it then became quickly adopted by the military, by scientists, all sorts of people in other jobs. This is sort of a quick recap of what we talked about in that series. Mm-hmm. The scientists and military that were using this test to sort people into jobs and roles best suited for their particular intelligences. No thought was put into whether other factors or variables might influence those scores, such as validity issues of the test or biases and that sort of thing. And some of the results of population samples of IQ tests were then used to support the claim that certain races and ethnicities were more intelligent than others, ignoring blaring confounding variables, such as the fact that many of the folks who were taking the test, they did this with people who were migrating into the country. These are people who were non-English speakers. They were immigrants. They were often refugees. Mm-hmm. They had no familiarity with not only the language on the exam, but the cultural examples and situations in the test also did not make any sense, even if they did speak a little English. And they'd score really poorly on these tests. And they're like, wow, we must be the smartest country in the world if the people immigrating here are so dumb that they can't, that their intelligence is way below ours.
Yeah.
Like that was kind of the way they approached it. And I mean, absolutely absurd. And then there was another example of this. They did this with African Americans in the military and people with low SES status in general, where they wouldn't explain the rules of the test. They just hand it to them and be like, here, take this. And then the people who were already high performers, they'd give them all this coaching and feedback and like guidance on like how to do the test to score a certain way, so that they would they categorize them in these like basically inept category of people who were just like had a piece of paper thrown at them and said, do this thing and then give it back to us.
Right.
And they'd be like, what is this? And they're like, shut up and do it. And the other people, they're like, all right, so this is what it's asking. This is how you do it. We want to make sure you understand the test really well. And so like glaring, ridiculous, obvious problems with that test.
Even with that, these types of tests have gone through evolution after evolution after evolution, and they are used for certain things. And they are still, at the end of the day, an IQ test, if you were to take it today, is a formal, standardized test that is not perfect, and it is not helpful, I would make the argument on that, in the way that people think it is. But you're not going to get an IQ test online that's going to be helpful. And the same is true for personality assessments. They're not test or normed or anything like that related to this kind of these user created or these like creator based assessments that you'll find online. So for the same reasons that IQ tests have become problematic and may have results that are not helpful, you'll see the same is true for personality assessments.
So we haven't really talked much about the history of here and sort of where this came from, but some claim that World War I saw the first personality test develop. And that depends on some factors, sort of how you define personality and how you define test and whether or not it was like should count and that, etc. Some even point to as late as like the 1960s as those really coming into play, although there had been lots of discussion about personality beforehand. Mm-hmm. But as far as the thing that would predate what probably became pretty close to that, which is these online quizzes, what we're talking about today, magazines have been doing this for a really long time. As a matter of fact, yeah, apparently back in the 1800s, there were magazines, which I didn't even know. I didn't realize they were printing magazines back then. And based on the history I was able to find, it suggests that these were ladies' magazines. We're talking about these women who are given no opportunity to do anything. They're bored at home. They might be able to get these magazines. There was no definitive origin, but the latest possible start that I found was 1888 in the magazine Comfort, which was publishing sort of quizzes of this nature. quizzes and puzzles and all kinds of stuff to make it interactive. And that's actually probably much later than when they actually started, but that's the first documented as 1888.
So magazine publishers would do anything to sell their magazines, and the quizzes were interactive and probably fun because nobody had anything to do, right? And these have even persisted ever since that because, while people were dealing and dying from diseases and trying to avoid that and all the millions of other things that were going on at that time, the quiz has persisted in some kind of format all the way up until today. I mean, Cosmopolitan is still doing quizzes. I mean, you still see those in magazines. BuzzFeed is just an online version of essentially what you would find in magazine quizzes.
Absolutely.
And so it's not surprising that the internet has kind of shaped this to become a platform for personality quizzes, or the internet has become a platform for it because it's so easy to develop. It's interactive. It brings people to your website. It piques interest, and it tries to answer questions that people have questions about, right? They want answers to these questions that they already have.
Yeah, and I tried to find, but I couldn't find the very first online quiz that was like a personality quiz. I'm sure it's out there, and probably someone who's a really good sleuth would be able to figure that out, but I was unable to track it down. But yeah, in fact, the internet has exploded the use of personality quizzes like a mutant cancer.
Yeah.
And BuzzFeed alone, as we've thrown them under the bus repeatedly, they have perfected this to like an artful degree. I really took it to the next level. So it is absolutely a thing. It is pervasive. It is out there. But I bet you do not see where this conversation is about to go. Are you ready to go down the crazy rabbit hole of what the f***?
Let's do this. When I was reading these notes, I am so glad that it got to this because, I think it's important to kind of caveat this by saying that typically we cover topics because there's some importance to it. Most of the time, we get to some that are pretty harmless, but we cover a lot of topics that end up being pretty harmful. So I bet you didn't think online personality assessments could be a problem.
And here's where they get dangerous. Okay. This got so off the rails. If you've been watching John Oliver lately, I don't know for many, maybe a lot of our listeners do, but John Oliver, he's a late night sort of personality host. He's on HBO. He recently discussed how cookies are used in our web browsers, right? That's a way to track our activity and can be used fairly easily to identify people because it tracks everything that you do, and it can isolate your activity and narrow it down to a relatively small location even. So I can look at like within a few square blocks or less, plus all of this other information about you makes it relatively not that difficult to narrow it down to who you probably are, who's using these. Right. And that's the thing that cookies do. And this has been going on for a long, long time. Like cookies is part of the internet. It's the thing that we all know is there, but it's gotten increasingly insidious and ubiquitous over time. And it's just they're pervasive throughout everything that we do when we're doing activity online.
Yeah. So it gets way worse. It gets way worse than just tracking your stuff. So a lot of people pay money to collect aggregated data about you, but then they send you undisguised personality quizzes and gather really juicy personal stuff. Like, how do they use this? Well, marketing, sales, right? And they sell those data to the highest bidders. So people are making money off of your data that you enter into personality quizzes.
Yeah. So they gather all this data about you. They send it to the people who want to buy it. What are they doing with it? It kind of depends, obviously, on who's the one buying it. Many companies simply want the data for highly targeted marketing, right? They want to increase the likelihood of sales. They want to market in a way that's going to reach the people that are most likely to buy it. And so directing all their efforts toward just those audiences is ideal. And people also get like annoyed when they get targeted by ads that are really, really irrelevant to them anymore. So that's part of another reason they use this. However, someone could and has use your activity and answers to these personality quizzes to start flooding your feeds, your news aggregators, your social media, that sort of thing, with subtle manipulations that are tailor designed to exploit your pre-existing opinions, vulnerabilities, insecurities, and desires, all that sort of stuff, all in the service of driving you towards some specific behavior.
So specifically, I've seen a lot of people get upset. They're like, but it's like my phone's listening to me. I never even said this thing out loud, and this ad showed up on my phone. Well, That's true. It's not listening to you. It's collecting data from you and your contacts and people around you and aggregating those data and creating ads that are based on your location, the people that you interact with online, the likes, the follows, that's where those ads come from.
Welcome to the future.
It has nothing to do with your phone listening to you. It is everything to do with what you're doing on your phone that produces those ads. So this has happened in just the last few years. A political figure hired a data analysis firm to do exactly this. The person's campaign sent out hundreds of thousands of personality tests and gathered highly detailed information about millions of people in the United States. Millions of people. They used their gathered data to launch an absolutely unprecedented campaign. The campaign was multifaceted and included, but was not limited to, A, leaning on existing insecurities and points of anger and confusion to push people toward voting, B, leaning on existing insecurities and vulnerabilities to push non-supporting people away from voting, and C, identify the campaign talking points that resonated the most powerfully with potential voters. And it worked.
It really worked.
Yeah. It revealed something that no one really widely understood about the voting public.
So, who was this nefarious character? Well, that'll become obvious in a moment as we start to explain what happened here. Now, this actually has happened more than once. Mm-hmm. The last person who did this was actually really transparent. They basically said, we are putting out these information gathering things because we want to know more about our voting constituents. We're going to use this information to better target our campaign so that we know how to reach voters. That was basically what they said. Mm-hmm. This was not what happened here in this situation. Nope. This was take this harmless personality quiz. And then once they had the data, they sold it to this campaign. They crunched the numbers. They used a PR firm to help them engage what they called psychological warfare and launch this campaign without anybody knowing what was going on. So I'm jumping ahead a little bit. Does anyone remember the Cambridge Analytica scandal? Do you remember this, Shane?
I do. It's a sore spot in my history.
Okay. I'm interested and a little sad to talk about it. So let's come right back to it after this. Promise this is related. We're talking about the Cambridge Analytica scandal. How does this relate to personality quizzes?
In case you don't remember the Cambridge Analytica scandal or anything like that, strap in. This is about to get bonkers. This is going to get wild. And so as I was reading these notes, it just floored me. So Cambridge Analytica was formed out of the efforts of some mega political donors and the human equivalent of a fungal gym sock, Steve Bannon. If you're not familiar with him, he's the worst. He thinks he's better genetically than a lot of other people. He's not. When we talk about mega, we're talking about tens of millions of dollars regularly coming into this. And Bannon understood that conservatives needed big data analytics to compete with the raw popularity of Democratic politicians. I mean, you think of like all the likable people that are out there. At the time, a lot of the conservatives didn't really have as many of those. So they had to try to figure out how to compete. And what they needed was a well-funded data analysis firm that was part of a critical step towards that. And so they wanted to fight a culture war. And Cambridge Analytica was to be the weapon to carry out that fight.
Yeah, so I believe that these are mega donors. They invest regularly the millions of dollars. They put about 15 million, I believe, into creating Cambridge Analytica. So they took on Alexander Nix as the CEO of Cambridge Analytica, and Steve Bannon then came on as the vice president. Now, Cambridge Analytica is just this data analysis firm. All they're doing is aggregating big data, right? And so what they did is in order to actually use their data, they published with a British PR firm with a long history of working with powerful people to push propaganda. And this firm was called the SLC Group. And a writer at Vox described SLC in this way. Quote, SLC tends to describe its capabilities in grandiose and somewhat unsettling language. The company has touted its expertise at, quote, psychological warfare, unquote, and influence operations. It's long claimed that its sophisticated understanding of human psychology helps it target and persuade people of its client's preferred message. End quote. So this is essentially what SLC Group does, is they figure out how to manipulate people en masse to do what they want them to do for politicians and that sort of thing. And so they construct these careful campaigns that are insidious and send them out to subtly manipulate people toward one particular attitude. And again, they're just exploiting these vulnerabilities. They're leaning on your insecurities. They're like they're figuring out what kind of things do you really want and then promising those as an outcome, even though they have no intention of delivering on them ever. Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of the way that they go about doing the psychological warfare to get people riled up and excited about supporting whatever the cause.
Yeah. And so if it sounds nefarious, it gets worse.
Yeah. Say we're only partway through.
Yeah. We're not. Yeah. So Cambridge Analytica tried to recruit the help of beloved WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange.
Yeah, beloved, scare quotes there.
Not really beloved, quote unquote beloved, we'll
Yeah,
say.
yeah.
But the real help came from a Russian American, Alexander Kogan. Kogan wrote a sneaky app for Facebook that was a personality quiz. Mostly, this would mean that people who took the quiz would be consenting to having their data shared with the app and subsequently its developers and relevant stakeholders. So it seems shady, but it was technically above board as long as the data are not then sold to third parties. So essentially, you're consenting to sharing data. You've got this app installed in Facebook. As long as they're not selling the data to somebody else, it's all on the up and up.
Now, in addition, they also promised in this quiz that you would receive a few dollars. It was less than $5, but you get some amount of dollars for taking this quiz. And then, they basically said, we're going to use your data to do the things that we normally use these data for. And so people just agreed to the terms that were on this. Of course, they're not reading them because nobody would. And at the time, Facebook technically allowed any app on Facebook to ask to have permission to look at both your profile as well as your friends' profiles. And that was a thing that was sort of built into the structure of Facebook. Now, that was kind of a loophole in Facebook's code, if you think about it, because rather than gathering data about the quiz taker only, the app was able to then also gather data about friends of the quiz taker. So while the quiz made its way to 270,000 Facebook users, which is already like a pretty decent number, the app ended up gathering data about 87 million users. So y'all got a lot of friends. And yes, they sold all of that data.
Now you've got all these data, you've got this loophole, you've got this kind of this firm that's working on pushing out psychological warfare, essentially, is what they've said, right? Their understanding of human psychology.
Yep.
Can you guess who Cambridge Analytica worked for?
No idea. Bernie Sanders.
Doesn't seem like the type. So they absolutely worked for the Trump campaign.
Yep.
If that wasn't clear, I mean, there's plenty of other records out there to show that that's what happened. But they worked for the Trump campaign and they pushed out a lot of stuff.
The Trump campaign boasted of their use of personality tests actually to help inform what they did. So they're not at all shy about this. They do play down how much they used it. And so we don't actually know for sure how they use the data. But what we can gather seems to indicate that with the SLC group, they essentially used the data to figure out how to rile people up, to say things that people wanted to hear, and also to get non-supporters to feel sort of defeated and unwilling to vote and participate in the process. They posted ads, blogs, videos, other messages directly targeted to specific groups to achieve their desired effect. So if they were launching an ad campaign that was anti-voting, they would make sure it was not making it to any of the people who were the conservative voters. They were only ever making it to people who were considered liberal voters, right? Mm-hmm. And they were very open about their fact that they used quizzes to an effect as part of their campaign. So that's not hidden information. What exactly we did, we're not totally sure, but this is what we seem to be able to gather based on what the campaign did do.
Right. And because we don't know enough about what they did, we have to speculate to what degree or what effect this did have. But we do know that it did have an effect because of the amount of ad revenue that was coming out, the amount of ads that were going out to targeted groups, and in just the nature of the data that was collected in general. So they also uncovered something extremely important. What you say doesn't matter as long as it can be used in a soundbite as long as it resonates with the people, with what the people want to hear. It's kind of like the Barnum Effect. If Barnum had been able to know everything about his audience beforehand and have them hear different individualized messages.
Yeah, we did an episode on the Barnum Effect that was the everything or something for everybody. And it's sort of similar to the idea of horoscopes is you phrase it in such a way that it could be applicable to anybody. And you think about when you're trying to sell something to get people in the door, you phrase it in such a way that something that you say will land with everybody.
Now, that meant the truth, reality, promises, all of it simply just went out the window. We just pissed it off, right? Because it's gone. It's done. We don't need it because we can target our audience. We can embolden, we can galvanize the people by these catchphrases, these sound bites, these silly one-line jokes that turn into phrases. I mean, that's how we end up with Let's Go Brandon and garbage like that.
Yeah.
So they could say one thing and then immediately contradict it in the next breath. But as long as they said two things that had two different people that heard those two different things and it wasn't the same person to contradict it, people ate it up because they were hearing their message. And that's what these data do. These data give you your message.
Right. Yeah. And it could be the same person to contradict. That was the thing, is like they would say both I'm in support of this and I'm not in support of this. And the person who wanted them to be in support of it heard I'm in support of this and stopped listening. And the person who heard I'm not in support of this, that's what they wanted to hear. That's what they heard and they stopped listening. And so like that's what they figured out. It's like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you say. Nothing matters. All you have to do is tell people what they want to hear and they will be like, wow, you're the greatest leader of all time. I mean, it is. P.T. Barnum would be just wetting himself if he had known that this kind of if he'd had access to this technology.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's that simple. I mean, it really truly is. I mean, I can remember going back to the Trump campaign and hearing that he wanted to eliminate Obamacare, and then when they asked what his plan for healthcare is, he said we'll figure something out, and never did. Yeah. And so, like, he said what people wanted, but then that got blasted out, and it became this kind of really problematic echo chamber.
Lots of things that we say we're going to do this. Doesn't matter if you're going to do it. Doesn't matter if you're going to try to do it. It doesn't matter if you do the opposite of that. The fact is, you said what people wanted you to say. Yeah, and that's all they cared about. And that was where it ended. So I don't think that anyone knew that you could get away with that much bullshit. I mean, we have seen a radical change in our world since then. And because once people discovered that you could say anything at all and nothing mattered, we effectively moved into the post-truth era. This is where we get our alternative facts and our fake news and all of that. Like, we are now in the era where it just doesn't matter. Like, you say whatever you want to say, and people will literally say things like, that's not what I choose to believe about like scientific information. Who cares if we've discovered how it works?
Exactly. And we know, and that's the other part too, is like, we see it. We can see these data. We can interpret and analyze these data. We can see behavioral trends. It's all there. But, doesn't matter. Scientists are bogus.
Yeah. So thank you, Cambridge Analytica and personality quizzes, for unraveling the fabric of society.
Appreciate it. And that's why personality assessments are dangerous. Online personality assessments, I should say.
Right. So yeah, the reason that all tied back, in case that wasn't clear, was because they used that personality quiz to gather all the information about people, and then use that to basically sort of hack, if you will, the accounts of 87 million other people.
It's dark.
All right. Quick take-home points.
So online personality tests can be entertaining. The more ridiculous or extravagant, the better the clicks are and the interaction with the content. So like, if they are fun, if they are goofy, if they're silly, then people are going to gravitate towards them. They're going to have fun with it. They're going to enjoy it. And it's a really easy way to grab data from people.
Yeah. And I think it is impossible to separate the subjective bias of the creators from the personality test, from the test itself. These BuzzFeed-ish personality assessments should really be viewed with skepticism, and then just understand that they are fun and nothing else. And they don't actually tell you anything about yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Bits of trivial nonsense.
So in many ways, even more official looking and widely used personality assessments can only tell you what you tell them. Like, they can't tell you more than that. There's no observations. There's no other data other than what you're reporting. And so conclusions that are made after filtering through that bias and subjective assessment are not going to be as accurate as you think they might be. So it's really important to remember that, like, when you are entering your information and you're answering these questions, it's still going through your filters, your biases, your perspective, and there's no other person to kind of check you on that.
I love that take-home point. They can only tell you what you tell them. That's an important one.
Yeah.
I like a lot. Now, of course, when we're talking about these indirect measures, these are just really not very reliable because they can't be observed. You're inferring the existence of a causal reality other than the one that you see before you. And so it is not as reliable as taking a natural scientific approach where we consider the relevant variables that can be at play. And I think it's just worth, is noting when we're starting to turn to the cause being inferred, I guess, as like the underlying reality, that's a problematic thing to at least note is logically flawed, if not also empirically useless.
And finally, this is for, I would make the argument this is more likely going to be for people who are practitioners and can interpret research. If you are going to use a personality assessment or you're going to enter one, then you should review the research base. But for those of you who are not familiar with understanding and interpreting research, you should probably not consider a personality test that you find online the end-all, be-all professional opinion for what you do, right? There are critiques, limitations, replications, and evidence that support some personality assessments that are standardized, normed, and used, but they are still done by a professional. So if you are going to look at these and you're going to consider these for any reason, you should go to a professional who does this for a living,
right? Not,
your cousin that you don't talk to that thought this would be a cool personality assessment to take. You can actually just do simple searches in Google. Hey, what about this personality assessment, or what are standardized personality assessments, and see what comes up in Google Scholar.
Right. And then I think I would end with just talking about the fact that these can be very insidious and dangerous because, again, you can be disclosing a lot of personal information on these that the people who wrote them, particularly if you go to them, they don't need to ask for your permission. And even if they do ask for your permission, you're usually just going to grant it to them whole cloth. And it might not be worth it, because they're going to use that information to try and manipulate you. They're going to sell your data. They're going to compromise your privacy and your security. So those are things worth considering. And I think we'll talk about this in a subsequent episode when we're talking about freedom. But the idea, I think, in here of like this being a freedom issue and what that means, I think you're considering like the freedom of the company to exploit your data, the freedom of you to grant them the ability to do that, the freedom of, whatever is there in that. We'll talk more about that in another discussion. But anyway, point being, these can be dangerous. Be careful with what kind of information you're disclosing on these. And yeah, Cambridge Analytica sucked, and I'm glad they're gone. Yep,
me too. And I think that's a good place to end. It's like you cut off one head, the two grow in its place, right? We know that that's kind of what happens with this stuff.
Yep. Hail Hydra.
Second Marvel reference. Yes, we got it.
Boom. Okay, I'm ready to give some recommendations. Do you have anything to recommend?
Yes, I do.
Recommendations.
So I got to go to the movies a couple weeks ago, and I got to see the new Sonic the Hedgehog movie.
Nice.
Did you ever see the first one?
I did not, but I heard it was actually pretty fun.
It is a joy. It is absolutely joy. And it is, I'm a big Jim Carrey fan as far as like his acting career goes.
Sure.
And so I am really, this is his last, supposedly he's retiring from acting, and this is his last on-screen performance, which is wild to think that his last on-screen performance is Dr. Robotnik.
Yeah, in Sonic the Hedgehog 2.
Sonic the Hedgehog 2.
That is very funny.
Very funny and very silly. It's actually, it's a lot of fun. And I do believe that the people that wrote it and directed it are very familiar with the source material. Like they cool. know how to, like, if you've ever played Sonic the Hedgehog, they're like, we got you covered. We know exactly how to get you in, and you'll appreciate this. Idris Elba plays Knuckles.
Okay.
He voices Knuckles, and it's great. And my favorite thing that happens is you see it in the trailers that, Dr. Robotnik builds the giant robot that Sonic has to fight at the end. Right before they go to fight, he says, I need some fight music. And Jim Carrey, the physical actor, the comedian that he is, kicks his leg out like it's a guitar and starts playing his leg like a guitar. And in the song that plays is Pantera's Walk.
Nice.
So it's my favorite thing about this movie is that it introduces an entirely new generation of kids to Pantera.
Awesome.
It's so great. It is a lot of fun. It's very silly. It's a lot of fun.
It's probably worth checking out then. I appreciate the recommendation.
I feel like you would appreciate it. Yes.
Nice.
So,
all right. Yeah. Cool. On my list.
All right.
So I was fortunate to stumble across a whole bunch of things I want to recommend. So I'm all geared up for the next few episodes and what to recommend. But today I'm going to start with this Hulu original TV show called The Thing About Pam, which, as I understand it, is based a little bit on a Dateline TV show that either came before or after this called The Real Thing About Pam or something like that. And this is I can't imagine this anything other than like a miniseries, because this is based on a true crime sort of story. Man, I don't want to give too much away here, but suffice it to say that like this is one of those stories with just like the worst investigation initially done, and that basically it all had to sort of be redone later when the wrong person is convicted and that sort of thing. And it is extremely well done. And I think here's the thing about this is, so Renee Zellweger plays Pam in this.
Okay.
And she absolutely sells this whole series. Like the whole series is good, but she is fantastic, like unbelievably good. And I mean, hard to watch. Like she plays a terrible character.
Yeah.
The titular character here, but she is really, really fantastic in this. I can't speak highly enough about her acting in this show. It's unbelievable. She really leans in that role like you wouldn't believe. Anyway, all the actors were good. The show is really good. I strongly recommend it. I think it's short-ish, maybe I want to say 8 to 10 episodes ballpark in there. Maybe only 8, honestly. I think it's right around there. Yeah, it's on Hulu. It's good.
Very good. I like it.
All right. Well, I think that's all we have to say about online personality tests today. We covered a lot of ground, honestly. This is a really, really long one. So thank you for sticking with us if you did.
Yeah.
I want to, of course, thank Kyle for doing an amazing job with his notes on this one.
Seriously.
Thank you, of course, for recording with me today, Shane.
Of course, anytime.
Yeah. And, the thing is, we really just couldn't do this show without the people who help support us on Patreon, our wonderful Patreon supporters. And they're the really ones who to help us keep the ship afloat, as they might say. And so this includes some people I'm going to list. But one important thing is we always try and shout out our Patreon members for being awesome and really helping with the show. And I feel terrible. I left off one of our Patreon members. I refer to a list of them to make sure that I read them all. And somehow his name dropped off. So I'm going to try and make up for that now. So I'd like to thank the following Patreon supporters for their amazing support. I'd like to thank Amanda, Brad, Joshua, The Daily BA, Justin, Josh, Justine, Kim, Joshua, Kostia, Layla, Joshua, Megan, Mike M, Mike T, Shauna, and Josh. Thank you everyone very much for our continued support of everything. You are the best, and I really appreciate you.
Yes.
And of course, thank you to my team. I've already thanked you and Kyle. Also, thank you to Britt, Alan, Selena, and Justin for their amazing work and the help that they do.
100%.
If you would like to tell us about your favorite online personality tests or how you feel strongly about them or your memory of the Cambridge Analytica scandal or anything therein, or let us know how we did, or even just pop in to say hi. We love hearing from people. Reach out to us on social media at WWDWWD podcast. You can also go to our Patreon page, the patreon.com/WWDWWD podcast, and you get all kinds of perks and all kinds of extra bonus goodies, including me reading your name 4 or 5 times as a thank you at the end of an episode. You can also support us by just leaving us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. We have a merch store that's full of stuff. You got sweaters, beanies, mugs, shirts. As a matter of fact, I don't know why I haven't mentioned this before, but we've been running a sale on our mugs ever since they went up. And that's about to end. I'm going to leave the sale up for a couple more weeks after this episode comes up. But there is a sale on mugs if you wanted to get one at a discount. That's been running ever since we basically made them available. Grab your Star Wars Day things, or hey, maybe these make good Mother's Day gifts. A Why We Do What We Do shirt. She's like, what's a popcast?
I love that.
So you can find those things there. And then, as I said, reach out to us. You can tell us also about TV shows you're into right now, or fun animated movies that you enjoy.
Or your favorite Sonic the Hedgehog level.
Your favorite Sonic the Hedgehog level is great. Definitely love it. Okay, I think that's all I have. Do we have anything else?
Nope, that's it.
All right, this is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.